Time was once just a clock to me, and life was just a book, a biography. Success was something you just had to be, and I would spend myself unknowingly. And you know that I could have me a million more friends, and all I'd have to lose is my point of view. But I had no idea what a good time would cost till last night when I sat and talked with you.
I'm here with
I'm Dave Hoekstra. Okay. Dave Hoekstra, the writer of State of Sound.
State of Sound producer, you're multi-talented.
Yeah, I've written some books, yeah.
We'll get into all of that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I'm also here with Marilynn Gardner,
Yes.
CEO.
President and CEO of Navy Pier.
Navy Pier.
Welcome to Navy Pier.
Thank you so much for coming out and meeting us here on your busy schedule. Take a few minutes.
Of course,
off.
happy to do it.
So let's start. Now this exhibit, we're here at Navy Pier, State of Sound, was your sort of brainchild, right?
Well, Lance Tawzer, who's the exhibits director at the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, him and I, we worked at the Elmhurst Museum on a couple of things. We did a thing on disco demolition, and we did a thing on Paul Knack. And so when Lance went to the Lincoln Museum in Springfield a few years ago, we collaborated on State of Sound, and we put it up in Springfield first at the Lincoln Museum there. And it went very well, considering it was up during the pandemic. They did really good numbers, and you know, so it went so well, it came to Navy Pier.
And how did that,
Yeah.
We had been in conversations with the Lincoln Museum for a couple of years, and through the pandemic in particular, about creating some partnerships for the museum to gain exposure in the Chicago area, and for us to serve as a platform to showcase all the great things that the Lincoln Museum does in Springfield. And we were particularly intrigued by State of Sound because, as you may know, Chicagofest was born at Navy Pier and was hosted here for, what was it, 4 years?
Yeah, right.
During the 70s and 80s. And so many people, I have to tell you, the number of times that I get asked if Chicagofest will ever come back to Navy Pier, if I had $1 for every time, I'd be very, very rich. But so many Chicagoans have that love for Chicagofest and distinct memories. And as a matter of fact, my very first memory of being at Navy Pier was for the Buckinghams, which I now know was August 1st of 1981.
Whoa.
I also saw John Prine here, and so many others. But again, my first memory of the pier, and who would think that we'd be standing here today talking about the history of Chicagofest, and I'd be running Navy Pier, standing here with Dave Hoekstra, who I read his column all the time in the Sun-Times.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our, you know, my first time here, I was 15 in 1979. Okay. My friend Jim Seibel, and he had his mother drive us down here.
Perfect.
And we saw the band Chicago during Chicagofest. It was like our Lollapalooza. It was amazing. Yeah. So that was my experience. So now here we are. Speaking of Chicagofest, here we are.
Here we are.
This is sort of in the open general concourse, right? It's open to the public.
Yes.
Basically during the hours of the pier, right?
Yes, absolutely, and it's adjacent to the new hotel, the Sable Hotel.
The Sable Hotel, right.
So it's really positioned pretty much in the center of the pier, so very central to the pier. So great spot with hotel, shops, restaurants, all surrounding, and direct access to the south dock.
The thing that I'm sitting here thinking about as Marilynn's talking, some of my memories of Chicagofest, and when I wrote the copy about this, was how diverse it was. There were all kinds of acts that were booked there, and that's what we tried to do with this exhibit. You know, is to show there's all kinds of different influences in Illinois music. You know, so we cover everything. You know, as you walk around, you'll see blues, house music, Latin, polka. the polka people are very proud to be. Yeah.
Wow, this is great.
Well, and it's really fitting too to have an exhibition like this here at the Pier because the programs that we present are so diverse as well. And when you think about the musical performances that here to this day are representing different genres of music. So it's not just blues, not just jazz, house music. It's all the above, just like you've been able to capture in this incredible exhibition.
You know, there's an unadulterated thing to Illinois music. There was an essay in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about the Bear, and just about, the guy who wrote it was from Chicago, but just how pure the intent here is in Chicago and Illinois. There's not a lot of business influences anymore, you know. It's really gets to the heart of creating art and stuff. And I think as you walk through this exhibit or hear the music that they do here at Navy Pier, that comes through loud and clear. Yeah.
That's a great point. Great point.
Absolutely. Now you have 8 to 9 million folks come through here every year, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's just an amazing.
On an annual basis, we welcome about 9 million guests.
Wow.
Yes, and again, they come for not only the incredible vistas and unique setting that the Pier provides, but some 300 programs that we present, performing arts and otherwise, and then of course the shops, restaurants, etc. But and we really attract a diverse group of attendees too throughout the year.
So what other things do you have planned here? Any sneak peeks or any previews or anything?
Well,
Mavis
I think one of the most exciting things that we do on an annual basis here is what we call Chicago Live. And it's a 2-day performing arts festival that will happen this year, September 23rd and 24th. And we have special guests this year. The great Mavis Staples will be performing on the Lake Stage in Polk Brothers Park on Saturday evening before fireworks. So there are 80 performances back to back, all different genres of performing arts, but it's just an incredible collection of not only marquee names in Chicago, but emerging artists. So you'll see Hubbard Dance, you'll see the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Lyric, Black Ensemble Theater, Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, Momentum. So just a full range of all performing arts for free. So it's really Navy Pier serving as a resource for the community, this free festival that's been made possible by the Pritzker Foundation. And it was created coming out of the pandemic as a way to reconnect artists with audiences for the first time after 18 months of the performing arts organizations being shuttered. And so it was a great way to reconnect artists and audiences and provide access for our guests to things that they might not otherwise have the opportunity to see. Again, for free.
Yeah, that's great.
Chicagofest, we had to pay, what, $5?
Right.
Okay.
People like this, that went well, and we didn't do as many big things in here as we did in Springfield, but people they really like the punk thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and I've been astonished that I didn't realize that so many artists were from Illinois, Chicago in particular, but just the full range. So I think, and that's what our guests have been so intrigued by, that it was, they're discovering things that they had never been aware of. And, it's really a great way to celebrate all the rich talents that are born and bred throughout the state. Who is it?
Tom Morello. I didn't know.
Right?
I booked Naked Raygun in college for a couple shows.
Where were you in school?
Cihla.
Okay.
Yeah, with the Eagles Club.
Nice.
With Big Black. I don't know. Probably here too. Steve
But
Albini.
the numbers that Marilynn was talking about, 8, 9 million. So, when we write this and put this together, if like 10 people do what you just did and said, Hey, I didn't know Tom Morello
Right.
was from here. I'm really excited about that.
Right.
It's all music is about discovery
Absolutely.
and excitement. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and then it's enriching the visit to Navy Pier too,
Right.
which
Well,
is why we're so intrigued by it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's do one last.
I want to show you the John Prine stuff. We're real proud of
Yes,
that.
of course.
Yeah.
But you'll have to come out for Chicago Live.
Oh, absolutely. We're always all about seeing the music. That's what's great about the city. All the neighborhood fest. And you've done some, I mean, we'll get into that a little bit, some documentaries with folks like the Staples.
Yeah, we did that.
So Dave and I believe that this can continue and grow even further. We've extended this exhibition through Chicago Live since it's the perfect fit and a great educational piece and a historical piece to tie into Chicago Live. But we have aspirations to
Yeah.
continue to grow this into something more long-term.
Yeah, you know, all my years at the Sun-Times, I was there for 30 years, and it was always a crusade of mine to keep wondering why Chicago doesn't do a better job of honoring its musical history. Again, going back to what we said, there's so much diverse musical history there in Chicago, and I travel around in a lot of cities. There's a lot of great music museums in Memphis, St. Louis, New Orleans, New York. We don't have anything here, so I think, yeah, well, I mean, chess is the closest thing.
Yeah.
And so I hope that the momentum from this
Right.
can take some type of form, a more permanent form.
Yeah.
You know, the one interesting thing we've got the musicians and the artists and their teams on board because they're excited to participate in this. When we did the event at the end of May, I mean, they're just so happy to be. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Here. Thrilled to be
Yeah,
here.
it's a legacy, and
Well, and it's
yeah,
there's
yeah.
such rich history.
Yeah, right.
Now we need the funders to
Yeah.
support and help grow it.
Well, like we'll get into that too. A little bit about your companion piece, the podcast that you've got going. You just had one drop yesterday.
Oh yeah,
Max Traxx or Wag.
well, you're right on it. I haven't even put that up yet. You must have found that
Wow.
somewhere.
It came out.
Yeah, Max Traxx. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was fascinating. I never heard of them before.
Yeah. So let me say something about this. I know John's family, and I know Old Boy Records pretty well, and they really stepped up to the plate to give us this stuff. So loan us this stuff. So John, especially in his younger years, probably when he was playing Chicagofest, I know when he played Eric Crown, he always had stage fright. He kind of got over that, but even
Same
toward
with Jeff Tweedy.
yeah, but toward the end of his life, he would bring these comfort things on a little table on stage, and it made him think of his roots here in Maywood, and I talked to his road manager when we got the loan, and he said after a gig, John would go to the hotel room and go on eBay and buy some of the stuff on eBay, but this stuff really connected with me. When the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame opened in Cleveland, I went out there to do an advanced piece, and the stuff that connects the viewer is that strips away the myth. You know, I mean, you can look at so many guitars and so many outfits, but the stuff like this that humanizes the artist, I think, is really what makes the museum work. So this is why I think that's why it's such a fun piece. Everybody likes it, and it's been at both places at Springfield and it's here. So it really humanizes John, his glass. Well, you see it, you know.
Well, that's the thing when you see a musician, like even someone like Lucinda Williams, you go see her. I remember I saw her 10 years ago or so, and she had this big book. She had a pedestal.
Yeah.
It was all her lyrics.
Yeah,
you
right.
know? So she would go through this book for every song. She had like a little memory lapses now and then. So things like this are, like you say, are important. And like things like that. And the same with Jeff Tweedy.
Tweedy, yeah, that's Tweedy.
Horrible stage fright.
That's Tweedy's hat right there.
That's Tweedy's hat.
Yeah.
He used to get
And
sick in
props
the
to Tweedy,
bathroom.
you know, Tweedy wears a hat and he's not bald. It's usually a rock and roll thing for bald people. I can say that because I don't know much. But
That's great.
Well, Marilynn, thank you so much for
No,
for
thank
coming
you.
out and
Thank you.
meeting us.
Of course, happy to do it.
Dave and I are going to find a little place to
Good.
kind
Yeah,
of
sorry
chill
about
out
the-
somewhere.
All right.
We have a spot right here prepared
Okay.
for you.
Great. Great. Well, Dave, it was a nice tour with you and Marilynn.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming down to see us.
You know, this started at, you did this at the Lincoln Museum, right, in Springfield. That's
The
kind of
Abraham
where it
Lincoln,
started.
Museum and Library. Right.
And then you
I
brought
should-
it here.
I should know the year, but it was like right before the pandemic or during the pandemic, and then it came up here in May, the end of May of this year.
Yeah, okay. So now, as a companion piece to this exhibit, you have produced a podcast that you've got about 30 episodes or so. And I'd say you've done maybe half of the interviews yourself?
Yeah, and Lance Tawzer. I love Lance. He's the curator at the museum in Springfield, and he's the one who hired me to do this stuff. So Lance has a radio background here in Chicago, and so he's done some of the interviews, and I have, yeah.
Yeah.
We just kind of picked and choose. I think Lance got Tweedy. I did Curtis Mayfield's kid, Steve Goodman's daughter. There's some good ones up there. Marilynn. I think Marilyn's is a good one. She has such a great sense of history of this space that we're in.
Marilynn, yeah, you
Marilynn Gardner.
got her. Marilynn Gardner, you got her twice, I think. She was in 2 episodes. Some other ones of interest. You had Terry Hemmer.
Oh, Terry, it was great. Terry came down at Langford, John Langford, but Terry came down to see the exhibit in Springfield.
Did
she
she
did
really?
a day trip. She came with some old friends from XRT, and they came down, and we did the interview. She saw the exhibit. We have Terry written into the radio section.
Oh.
We talk about her. When I updated it, we gave a nod to Lynn Bramer. But then she turned around and came back. She did a day trip with her
Oh,
friends. Yeah, it was
wow.
really nice.
She's a treasure.
It was a great interview. People should check that interview out.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
have you heard it? I mean,
I've listened to them all.
We did a really deep dive with her, and I think I
Yes.
may have asked her questions she had never been asked before. It was a very good. She got kind of emotional. It was a good interview.
Yes,
would check
I
it out.
remember.
Yeah.
Yes, she back in '97, she invited. They wanted to do something with the Shawnemeter at opening day at Yaxie's, and so she had me for lunch at what's the muffin place on and Sather's.
And Sather's, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd never been there. I was 25, 30 years old. Went there, sat down with her, was there for 2 hours. She's telling these amazing stories about XRT in the early days.
Yeah.
And playing softball for a while they weren't letting women play. And she's
Yeah.
like, I'm like one of the better players on the team. And she probably was.
Yeah,
She's
right.
like, so they brought her in and they were, it was great. So saw her at my first time went to Jazz Fest. And she goes every year, obviously.
New Orleans.
New Orleans,
Yeah, right,
yeah.
yeah.
And I was like, my goal was to run into her during the 3 days we were there. And then we finally got in line on the airplane coming home, right behind her, in line in the jetway. So you got to talk. But that must have been fun with Terry. Yeah,
Terry is such a great ambassador for Chicago music,
Yeah.
and she's positive. She's
Yeah.
not cynical. She has something good to say about, she's great. And she's still active on social media. She's been posting a lot lately, just about things to see. She gave the exhibit another shout out and stuff. So yeah, she's been a great friend to the exhibit. Yeah.
That's great. Another, it's such an interesting podcast with all these musicians and relatives of musicians. You've got live performances on these too. One of the most powerful things I've ever heard on a podcast, you had Bucky, was it Halter?
Oh, you listen to Bucky Hawker, yeah.
Hawker, and I was actually driving at 1 a.m. in the rain in Central Illinois when he played that Dying Miner song.
Oh, really?
I always had to pull over. It's such an emotional moment.
Oh, that's a great place to hear it.
It was really powerful. And then some of the other folks you had on there.
Oh, gosh, I'm glad you liked that one.
Yeah, that was really something. Angel Varios.
Oh, Angie's a good friend of mine. Did that come through? I've known Angie.
Yeah.
Angie and I had Cub tickets together for like 30 years. We were in section 242, yeah. Angie's a real good friend of mine. I've known him we stay in there. I've known him forever. It's longer. I didn't know it was long, but he told me how long it was. Anyway, but yeah, John Prine's drummer, and he played with Stevie Goodman. But Ange, let me tell you about people can listen to these podcasts, but man, he has such a great sense of history that I didn't even know. If you listen to that one, he really has a great sense of Chicago music history. So.
He's so laid back, too.
Yeah.
He's just so and then I've played for John Prine. I was doing, he was like a hustler. He was really working hard at his craft.
Yeah.
And it never went to his head, it seemed like.
He's a very good drummer.
Yeah. And then you had folks like Kathy Byrne, the daughter of Matt
Kathy was
Byrne.
great. Yeah,
Kathy.
that was on our Chicagofest one.
Another really great one was the photographer Paul Natkin.
Oh, Natkin. Yeah, he knows. He never shuts up. I was telling Marilyn that. No, Natkin's got a million stories. He's been around forever.
Oh my God. Those were great. Of course, John Langford, the grandson of Willie Dixon, Alex Dixon, Chea Mayfield?
Yeah.
Rosanna Goodman, Steve Goodman's daughter. So now let's transition to you've got a new book out, and here it is right here, Beacons in the Darkness.
Beacons in the Darkness.
So now, I get the impression,
Now I have to be more serious for this.
Yeah.
There's fun stuff in here.
So, you seem to immerse yourself in these projects that you do. I mean, you go headlong into these things. You were all over the country for this, right? I mean, there's no travel budget, but sometimes we were showing a documentary in L.A., our documentary on Ozark Springfield music. But a lot of it is Central Illinois. I mean, Hillsboro, Illinois is a big part of this book. So I went down there like 7 or 8 times. I think we go into parts of Missouri. I was in Memphis. The Defender used to have an operation there in Memphis. So sometimes I was in a city for something else, I'd pull over and do something for the book. But let me say this about the book, the elevator speech on this, is I did a book on Midwest supper clubs, and that book did very well. Called The Supper Club Book. That's about 12 years ago. And what I did in that book was talk about the meaning of sense of place, the challenges of multi-generational independent families keeping a business open. 3 or 4 generations of people doing supper clubs. So what I tried to do is use that same template in this book, is like, what's it like for family newspapers and multi-generational newspapers to keep a newspaper alive in what is a dying industry, up against like corporate influences, up against all the news people get on social media. So that's kind of what this book is about. We talk about small town bowling alleys. That's the bowling alley. Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah.
I've got a house in Central Illinois I've been working on for
Where's that at?
It's in a town called Cihla Park.
Okay.
And so it's, when I go to the gas station to get my 3 newspapers, the Cihla Park News, it's a town of 800, the News Gazette out of Champaign, and then the Daily Chronicle out of Kankakee. I get those 3.
Good
They're
for you.
Small,
Yeah, right.
But you get a flavor of what's going on, and it's a shame, like you said, that these things are dying off, and when history writes about this period in our time right now, do you think that this is going to be a part of it, like the demise of this local news, where everyone's now getting in their media silos kind of thing? Do you think that's part of what's going on right now, or are we still on life support?
I think the book, the book is optimistic. I think as long as people innovate and try to do new things and think really outside the box. I know in bigger markets, maybe they're afraid to do that. The thing about, you have to answer to shareholders and the money flow. I think you're going to experiment more in small towns, and we get a little bit of that in the book. We talk about that. I think if people are always going to be hungry for local news. I mean, we talk in there about people want to know what the local bowling team is. Obviously, obituaries are a big thing in small towns.
Yeah.
People, older people, the printed version of the newspaper skews toward older people. But we talk in the book in Hillsboro. I mean, when their kids are in Little League or in the local high school band, what do? They clip out.
Absolutely.
They clip out the thing from the newspaper and put it on the refrigerator and stuff. They don't print out something from the computer. I think there's a vibe, almost like, maybe it's like, I'm just riffing here, but almost like vinyl. I mean, there's a there's a physical thing to a newspaper that maybe leads to more of a sense of trust. People need to know. And I think that, and we talk about this in the book, there's a responsibility of the reader and the consumer to know where their news is coming from. And I think there's more of a trust in a small town with a printed newspaper as opposed to some, where's your stuff coming from on the internet? Where's the source?
Right.
Who's writing this stuff? And unfortunately, I think that division between trust and real news and fake news and all those type of things has gotten worse in the last several years.
Yeah.
Since 45 became president.
You know, we got a place out in Michigan. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we got a place in Michigan, Berrien County, and Buchanan, and we saw the demise of the local paper there. Berrien County Register, I think, was the oldest paper in Michigan, or 1867, and now all they do is they print like the foreclosure notices.
That's all they do.
That's all they do now, you know. So I'm curious to.
I mean, then on something like that, I mean, did that go away because of the lack of interest in readers, or did that go away because of advertising? Again, we go to Hillsborough. You know, I was doing this book during the pandemic, and I kept an eye on Hillsborough. I was worried about their award-winning newspaper. Hillsborough is about an hour north of St. Louis, about 45 minutes south of Springfield. Okay. But, you know, during the pandemic, advertisers were taking out ads at discounted rates. It's community. They were all helping each other, you know, and so.
Well, you know, you talk about innovative, and I think the really interesting thing that you bring up towards the end, the optimistic, because you are optimistic in this book, is this not-for-profit model. You know, like, I think the Reader's doing that. I think
WB right downstairs, WBZ and the Sun-Times merged on that. And they're doing a non-for-profit. You know, I mean, non-for-profit doesn't mean you don't have to make money.
Right, absolutely.
You still have to make money. You still got to, print the paper. You know, that is one way to go. I like what we talk about at the end of the book. Of what they do in Texas, a small town, now Marfa, Texas. Okay, Marfa, Texas is like a hip, progressive, artistic town. I don't know if this is working all kinds of
Is it near Austin, or?
I did not go there. I did all my work for them by the phone, but it's down by the border, by the Mexican border.
Okay, like Brownsville.
But what they did is they bought, a young couple from Brooklyn bought the paper from a family, and they make it like a community center. They opened up a little coffee shop and gift store right next to the newspaper offices. So people come in and it's a weekly, they pay their bills for the weekly newspaper, and they might have a cup of coffee. You know, reporters will get tips just from being like, it's like a community center. I think breaking down walls, and especially in the area where the media isn't trusted, breaking down walls and making the newspaper a visible part of the community is really important. Yeah. I think that could be a model for the future. It's great in these small towns because they see the editor and publisher at church, in a bar, in a grocery store, and there's a real connection there. It's not like some on another level type thing. But nonprofit, nonprofit is the way people are going. I think when you do a nonprofit, and I'm no expert, and there's some voices. Again, when I was doing the book, the Reader was going through the nonprofit thing, and Evanston's in the book.
Yes,
they
a lot in there.
They moved into nonprofit.
Yeah, they were like the first, right?
As the book was being put together, they moved into nonprofit mold. But I think you got to watch out. One thing I learned is you got to watch out for your board. I don't think you want to make every nonprofit has a board. You don't want to make the board too many people. And you also have to keep an eye, like what are the board's motives? What do they want to do? I don't know this to be, I've heard stories like this, but say a board member wants a certain story, like I want a story on my kid's high school football team. How do you filter the ethics of something like that? So I think nonprofits have to monitor their nonprofit boards a little bit, but it is a way. Anything, just all kinds of ideas just to keep newspapers alive.
You mentioned the paper tangibleness of a actual newspaper, and I went to grad school at Loyola. It was like probably 96, 97. It was like my first economics class, and the teacher got up and I don't know what the context was, but he held up the Wall Street Journal and he said, "This is your MBA right here." And that night I went home and subscribed, and I've been getting the paper on my doorstep 6 days a week since then. And I tell you, the journalistic integrity of that paper is unbelievable. I have no qualms with how they write their stories. They do the research. And then there's this bifurcation with, you said, these boards, you know. The editorial page is like, I'm reading the New York Post. And
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
But, you know, if you report truthfully, you know,
Yeah.
and you trust that, because I'm skeptical, and I have no, I don't see anything seeping in their journalism.
Well, I mean,
Until-
I think, you know, readers have to be educated. I mean, even, I don't know how many readers now know the difference between the editorial page and the copy.
That's
You know?
it, right?
And it's like you go into a grocery store, you got to kind of know what you're buying. I think when you walk through a newspaper, you got to understand I think there's a responsibility for the reader
Yeah.
on a lot of different levels. you
Yeah,
know?
and then that goes back to education of our
Yeah.
populace. And
Yeah.
that's a whole
But
larger.
I mean, you know, we grew up. I talk in the book. I mean, I grew up in Naperville, but my dad
Uh-huh.
worked into the city. It was part of our DNA. He'd come home with, there would be 4 newspapers around the house when I was a kid. There were 2 morning papers and 2 afternoon papers, and it was just, I grew up around the printed word, and to me, newspapers are still an adventure. The printed newspaper. I mean, I go online, I read the Athletic, and
Yeah,
you know, but
yeah.
you know, those long stories in the Athletic, I print them out.
Yeah,
There's one I want to
right.
print out the other day on Tim Anderson, but I print that stuff out. Just walking through a newspaper is such an adventure. It's like, you know, okay, here's features, here's food, you know, and you can do that online, but it doesn't have the sense of adventure for me.
Because you were kind of.
You should see me on an airplane, you know. I was just in Palm, and I'm the only person on an airplane. Like, they're trying to read a newspaper. But,
Yeah.
but you know, I went through the whole vinyl thing. I keep comparing it to that.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
People said vinyl was dead, and I was still listening to records. You know?
But you're like a newspaper guy. I think of like another podcast that I absolutely love that I kind of shaped this around is David Axelrod. You know, he was a newspaper.
Oh,
You
yeah.
probably saw him
Oh,
on
yeah.
the beat back then, right? You probably saw him around.
And, you know, I never did serious stuff like he did. I'll tell you where I maybe ran into Axelrod a couple times. He was a big Bulls fan.
Oh, okay.
And he's friends with Sam Smith.
Oh.
And who covered the Bulls for years and stuff. But I just knew him kind of from that. I mean, I never. My whole life at the Sun-Times was pretty much feature writing, and
Yeah.
I did sports on
Yeah.
and off. I did the Bulls one year, but
Well, that's what when I was at this Chicago Literary Hall of Fame event and with Don Evans, and that's when I met your friend John Lillig. That's how he introduced me.
John, yeah.
Yeah. So I told him what I was doing with these interviews, and he's like, "Oh, you should interview Dave Hoekstra." And I had known you from being a writer, you know, in the Sun-Times. And I'm like, "Yeah, it'd be great." So that's how we connected. You know.
Yeah, John's great. He's been a big supporter of my
Yeah,
stuff.
he was
He's
great.
amazing.
Yeah. And with this book, your most recent book, have you been in touch with any of the people that you've done for this book, that were in this book?
I keep in touch with, that's a good question. I should do a better job of that. I know one time I was going down to Missouri, University of Missouri. We were in a talk down there. The people in Iowa, they came to, that's a good chapter of the book.
Here's why I asked that, because I was thinking of, in particular, Garth Basil Reeves 3.
Oh,
Miami.
boy, yeah, that's a great story.
You know, with what's
Yeah.
going on in Florida right now, between
Boy,
the
that's a good-
malaria, the leprosy, the you know, the LGBT stuff, the book bans, you name it.
But that's you know, people have to buy the book to get the whole Garth story. I mean,
Yeah.
but in a nutshell, I'll tell you about that. In a nutshell, it's a small, independent, black family newspaper in Miami, and his father. It's in the book. I mean, if you read that section of the book, his father came over from the Bahamas,
Yeah.
and maybe he's Garth's 3rd generation. It was real interesting to me. I've been to Miami a million times, but it was real interesting for me to hear him talk about the challenges of black journalism in Miami, because it's such a melting pot of all kinds of different cultures. Latin America, you know, it's the entry. You know, so you've got more than black people clamoring for advertising dollars in Miami. You've got the Cuban community, Puerto Ricans, Mexican. So I think just to have an African American paper down there has been a challenge for them. You know, to answer your question, no, I'm not. And I kept trying to, you know, most of the people I got a hold of, I never could get a hold of him again. And I was in Miami in February. I went to spring training.
Oh,
I
fun.
don't go to, I'm over the whole Mesa thing. It's like not even like spring training with the Cubs do. So like last couple of years I've gone to Jupiter, and I go see, Jupiter's got a little nice little. I go see the Miami team this year. Anyway, so I drove around, and because he was in this Art Deco community, this old Art Deco community. It's in the book. In Miami, I kind of wanted to find him. I was just going to do a cold call. And this office they talk about, this is all true, this office we talk about in the book, and I went by it, and it was like kind of boarded up. It wasn't like an office anymore. So I go online, they're still printing, but no, I really am curious about how they're doing.
Interesting.
I know they made it through the pandemic, but that's a long answer. But no, the people I keep in touch with the most are the ones in Hillsborough.
Yeah.
I don't know when you're going to air this, but I think it's only up through the end of August. But what I saw in Hillsborough, the Smithsonian saw in Hillsborough, and they've got an exhibit, now you have to Google this, or I think it's up through the end of August, about small town innovation.
Through the Smithsonian Institute?
Yeah, and they're doing a thing, and they picked Hillsborough, the same city I picked, and they're doing an exhibit down there. I mean, I know Hillsborough is maybe a little bit of drive from Champaign where you go to, but, and they're talking, and they're celebrating Hillsborough for the innovative things they're doing, how they're keeping their downtown alive. And you know what? We talk about this in the book. The newspaper's a champion for that, you know? And they get involved in those. I remember one time I interviewed the publisher of the paper, and they were trying to bring a new business into town. It's like a tool shop or something. They're coming in from St. Louis to open up a store in Hillsborough. And I met him. I try to do as many interviews as I can in person. Anyway, I met him at a coffee shop in Hillsborough, and he was wearing the baseball cap for the, it's in the book, for the business they were trying to bring in. You know, sometimes that might have been an ethical thing, you know, don't want to do that. Yeah. But they've been real champions. The newspaper have been real champions for development in their downtown, and it's paying off, you know. That's what you got to do in these small towns, and they do this in Chicago, but I mean, it's not just, I'm not over romanticizing small towns, but really got to roll up your sleeves and get involved.
Do you know the population in that town?
Hillsborough, gosh, it's in the book.
8,000,
maybe 8 or 9,000.
Okay,
yeah.
So because you wonder it's amazing how you see this like in, across the border in Berrien County, Michigan. You see these towns, and some make it and some don't. And what's the secret sauce? You see some doing antique stores or dispensaries, or what I think what wiped a lot of them out were the big box stores, maybe in the late 70s or something, and now they're trying to, but each town has their own little story.
What they're doing in Hillsborough is they're getting the young people to invest. I mean, there's to me it's one of the best parts of the book. There's a young couple. I've got allergies. You edit all this.
Oh, that's okay.
That's what I see. But there's this young couple, one was from Hillsborough and the other was from Champaign, and they moved out to the West Coast, and the gentleman was the co-founder. He led the team. I think this is a great story. It's in the book. But he led the team that invented the iPhone. And, and he's he doesn't like talking about it. I had to go again. I went down there and I got some stuff out of him. So, he made a lot of money. He retired like in the late 30s, early 40s, very young age. They go back to Hillsborough. They buy this old hotel called the Red Rooster, and they were just starting on it this book took maybe 2 years, 3 years. They were just starting on it when I started on the book. Now the hotel is open. They come back to Hillsborough. They renovate. He did it himself with friends. They renovate this hotel, turn it into a really nice hotel. They open a brewery in there. I think they might have live music there. But this is what I'm talking about. These guys are in their 40s. They come back and they reinvest. They left Silicon Valley. They're living in San Francisco, and they come back to Hillsborough, move into the town, and bring and there's stuff like that happening in Hillsborough. Yeah. There's a record store and a couple coffee shops. They got a downtown movie theater that came back. So I think, to your point, I think like little small towns like that, you got to get the young people involved and believe in the future.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who grew up in Michigan. They couldn't wait to get out of town. They moved to Chicago. How do you keep? They call it the creative class, but how do you keep those people in town? Especially in small towns.
You almost do need a big whale like that to come in and see the potential and it takes a lot of, like you said, a lot of investment.
It's easier, I can romanticize small towns. I never really lived in one.
Yeah.
I know. I always go to visit these places, and okay, everybody would know. I'm just.
I know that's how I do.
Everybody knows your business. Yeah, right. And I mean, in small towns, I was in Naperville when I was a kid, but there's it's not. I can over romanticize, but you can say things. It's easier to get things done.
Yeah.
You have to go through a lot of red tape and stuff like that, but. I don't know. I keep saying. I kept thinking about the supper club thing. There's a little certain charm to it and a certain nobility to it, and that's why they call it. I didn't title the book, but that's why it's called Beacons in the Darkness. I mean, there is hope.
There
I
is,
spent
there
my
is.
whole life in journalism. Journalists love to complain about everything. Oh, the sky is falling and stuff. This book is not. There's a lot of books like that. This book isn't like that.
Yeah. Well, let's you've got such a wealth of things to choose from.
This is gonna be a 5-part series.
I know. I was thinking this could be 2 hours easy. But the one thing I did another book that was really fun.
Are we done with
your
this?
camper book? Yeah, your camper book. So it was funny because when John Lillig recommended you, I like I said, I knew you were a writer in the Sun Times. And when I started researching your stuff, I'm like, oh my God, there's a lot of synergies there, a lot of similar interests, So, and then I saw that Jeff Daniels does.
Jeff Daniels, yeah.
And I had known him through the Jim Carrey stuff, but then I kind of got to know him recently through Michael Moore's podcast. I'm like, this guy is really interesting, and I actually was like. After COVID, when To Kill a Mockingbird was going to reopen on Broadway, I'm like, if he's in it again, I'm going to go because I want to see Jeff Daniels. And you've got him writing your foreword.
He wrote our foreword, yeah.
And that's amazing, right?
I don't remember how that happened. I think it was pretty easy to get through. I think he just has he didn't have a big publicist. He might have a publicist over there in Michigan. Where he lives in Michigan.
That's right.
He's a big Tigers fan. My hat's off to him for that. But yeah, he's a big camper guy. He's got a big monster RV. My book, the camper book, was based on a little transit van I had remodeled or remade into a camper. And a lot of people are doing that now. Again, that book came out. Remember, that book came out right after my parents died, 2016, 2017. But Jeff's got a big monster RV, but he's serious, and so somehow I knew that, and so he did a really nice forward for the book. My photographer John Saul and I drove over to see him in Michigan. We brought my camper. We showed it to him, and yeah. I mean, he has a little home studio. And that was all coming back to me. He has a little home studio there. He plays music, so he played us some songs. At that same time, this is before COVID. He was on a little mini tour, so I went and saw him at City Winery. He played City Winery here in Chicago. He writes some nice songs.
Yeah.
But he's very, we hit it off with baseball. Both him and I are such huge baseball fans.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You had mentioned your parents, and you in that book you will intersperse little lines or here and there, tell the reader about what you've got going on, maybe a comment about Bluebird, which is the name of your camper band.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about this, I think it might have been, you had someone, well, it might have been early on, and you slipped in this line that I found was pretty devastating, but I mean, it says a lot. You said, my parents were in home hospice together, holding hands and dying at ages 93 and 94. And you lost them right before this book.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's there's a lot in that one sentence. And that sounds like a whole nother story that you could tell.
I told my brother, he was just up he lives in Nashville. And now I look back on that, they died 2015, I believe. Yeah. And I was doing that book. I think that book might have been a little post-traumatic thing. It was rough because it was one of those things where they were married 60-something years and they just died one after the other. They were I think within 6 weeks they were both gone.
What a love story.
And I left I'd taken a buyout from the Sun-Times about a year before that, kind of where I was able to focus on them. So I went through a lot there in 3 years. So I think maybe now I look back at that book, at what I did, I think maybe I had to go find myself. I drove around and we got, again, all these books. There was no travel budget. I mean, nobody paid to get that van rebuilt except me.
Yeah, it was
I had some extra money from buyout and stuff, but we drive all these campgrounds, and we drove it all the way to Southern California and up. John, my photographer, had to leave. We went to Seattle. He had to go back home. He flew home. Then I drove up to Southern Canada and back through Wyoming. But there was no travel budget. It wasn't one of these books where I spent the summer driving around, but it wasn't like I didn't go coast to coast for a year or anything like that. But we found some great stories.
Yeah.
Anywhere you go, you can find a story.
Yeah.
All you gotta do is listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got to be a good listener for what you do. My father died at the age of 49.
Oh, man.
So I was a young kid, and we had a little. He rented. You mentioned Angela in your book. Her father died before seeing the things that he wanted to see, like the Grand Canyon and Mount Rushmore. So she was like, "We've got to go see Dad's list."
Yeah.
And my father, luckily, right before he died, he was able to. He rented for 3 weeks. We rented one of those Winnebago Indians, like it's probably 1975 or something. And we rode all around. We saw Grand Canyon, Mount Rushmore. We fished in Yosemite. We went Portland. We went salmon fishing.
Well, that's great.
So he got to see.
Now, did you write that up? Did you? That's something of a lifetime.
I never did. I have the photos, and I've been researching his. He was on a destroyer in World War II, and I've been researching his letters and his ship's diary and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I should. I really should kind of do something with that.
Yeah.
But and like you had said earlier, there's a theme running through a lot of your stuff: community and sense of place.
Community is really important to me.
Yeah.
And I think community has always been important to me, for whatever reasons. Maybe when I was younger, maybe I wanted to be a social worker. I don't know. But then what happened? I just think the way the world has gotten so fragmented in the last 8 years, 9 years, where people everybody is just so tribal. And it's not even just politics. It's just like this, that, music, it's a friendly tribes and stuff. But I just think it's really, and it goes back to the state of sound, it's just important to hear and listen to what other people are doing and learn something new about somebody, something that you don't know about. So again, these books, none of them are really bestsellers. The Supper Club book's done well, but if you can get somebody who just read a book or learn about a newspaper or learn about somebody's quest on the road while camping, and it resonates, like you just told me your story there.
Yeah.
Then it's been a success. I think community is really important.
Yeah.
And what I tried to do with the camper book is, again, you're right, sense of place is something I like to talk about. So what happens when sense of place is moving?
Yeah.
Campers are moving around.
Yeah, right.
So what's
Is it in here? Is it physical? Is it a memory? You've probably seen the book Here by Richard McGuire.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's sort of an interesting take on sense of place, like through the millennia.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing, another character in this book. I bet you when you were writing for doing sports stuff, you never thought that you would be interviewing at one point the Cubs World Series championship manager, but not about baseball.
Yeah, right. Well, he's a real, he's well, you know this. He's really into it.
Yeah.
He's a real guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's really into the whole camping culture. Again, he's got a huge rig. I had done a little bit of this for the Sun Times. Like a couple times they rented me big RVs. One time we went down to Graceland. Another time they rented me and Angie went on this.
Wow.
We did an RV trip to the Super Bowl in Miami.
Huh.
Was that Indianapolis? Yeah, that was Indianapolis, where the Bears played the Colts.
Oh, yeah. Was that 85?
No, I didn't take the RV to that one.
Oh.
But Angie and I,
that's right.
They put me in an RV for the Rex Grossman.
Oh, okay.
But I covered, once I was there, I covered some stuff for the Sun Times. My big memory of that was covering the Prince halftime show in the rain.
Oh my God! You were there for that?
Yeah, right. That was part of
my
that.
God!
But anyway, I had experience with these big RVs, and for a guy like me, especially when you're on the road, there's some, you got to do the sewage thing and empty the water. I'm not real good in that, and it's not my skill set. So with this little camper that I wrote the book about, it's all. I mean, I have to go to a campground that has showers and bathrooms and stuff like that, but it's very convenient.
I thought for a while I was kind of into that, looking to do that. But that's the one thing I think if I were to do a van like that, it would be like yours, where you have to go and I don't want to be driving around with my toilet.
Yeah, and then some of those you got to get a pickup truck or something to lug it around.
Yeah.
But anyway, Madden is really. I mean, he's got it. He's got it. I've never been in it, but they send us pictures. But he was good to talk about. John Prine is in the book. John, and John Prine. I'm sure he did it as a favor because they had it for a while and then he got bored with it. I think there's stories in there. Maybe they didn't spend much time in it. I think his wife finally made him sell it. I think it was just sitting in their backyard. They had a home in Florida. But there's some celebrity stuff in there. But there's also just people I met along the way. And
Sure.
John Saul, he was
he was your photographer, right?
Yeah, he was a Sun Times colleague. He took some wonderful pictures for
Yeah.
that book. John was really into it. John's really into camping culture, and so the book is beautiful. It's a nice book. I think it's still out there.
There was a
Chicago Review Press.
Yeah, and I saw yesterday there was a WTTW did a nice interview. Was it Ponce or where they featured you talk about your book and the photography and all that.
When? Yesterday?
It was probably
Not yesterday.
2017.
Yeah, right. Oh, you looked at it yesterday.
Yeah, I saw it. It was online. Yeah, so
right.
it's still there. So that
You're
was
very
really
well
cool.
researched.
Well,
I'm very impressed.
You've got a.
You're not like
quite a
Larry
body of
King.
work.
Larry King would always, I never read the book. But very
No,
good.
it was a good interview though.
Yeah.
Because they showed like almost all the photos from the book.
Yeah,
throughout the
yeah.
interview.
To set the book up, people can still find it. I mean, it is out there. It's a lot of great photos.
Yeah.
I'd say it's 60% text, 40% photo, but John did a great job of it.
Yeah.
John's a great photographer.
Yeah, that was something. Then there's some projects that I like. You did a book, Steve Dahl, Disco Demolition, and I have a connection there. Real quick, my Steve Dahl connection. So this was right around the time when I would have gone to Chicagofest probably when I was 15 years old. Everybody listened to Steve Dahl back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the swim team. I get up at, he had a TV show even for a while. At like god awful 6 in the morning or something. I would be watching his TV show on my little black and white and listen to him on the radio. Everybody was into Steve Dahl, right? And my mom was a realtor in Riverside.
Oh, Riverside.
Yeah. So I'm at home and she comes home. She's like, "Hey, do you know Steve Dahl?" And I'm just like, "Well, duh. Yeah, of course. Everybody listen to him every day." He's like, "Well, he just came into my office, and I'm going to be showing him houses and stuff."
Yeah.
So she sold him their house in Bolingbrook.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they became friends, and Janet and my mom would go out and go garage sailing and things. My mom died in '93, unfortunately, but so talk a little bit about that and that whole disco. Were you there for that as well?
Yeah, I was there for that. That's almost a whole nother. Yeah, I was there for that. Again because I was a big baseball fan. I wanted to see a doubleheader. I'm a Cubs fan, but I like baseball. I'm going to Sox game tonight.
Yeah.
I'm going to Sox game tonight because it's Yacht Rock night. I like Yacht Rock. But I don't think a riot will break out at Yacht Rock night. So yeah, my girlfriend and I my girlfriend was from Beverly at the time. And we just bought a ticket, sat in the upper deck. I wasn't a big Loop listener. I listened probably to XRT. I listened to Loop now and then.
Right,
but I liked rock and roll. The first rock show I ever saw, a major rock show, were the Faces at the Chicago Stadium.
Whoa.
With the Mahavishnu Orchestra as the opening act. And so, 79, Rod Stewart's doing Do You Think I'm Sexy, which I hated. And I hated that song.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a ripoff of the Stones' Miss You.
Yeah.
So that was the record I brought to Disco Demolition. You got in for 98 cents
wow.
if you brought in a rock and roll record. And
jeez.
so that's how we got in. And then they had the riot. And, I don't have any big funny stories. I didn't jump on the field. I didn't throw the record. There's stuff about throwing the record. I mean, maybe people snuck records in, but I remember I had to turn the record over when I went through the gate. So it's not like I brought a record and, I gave them the record when we walked through the gate. I remember my girlfriend and I left, and my brother was with us, I think. And my brother maybe went back to Naperville, and her and I maybe went to like McCuddy's, might have still been open, the old bar there. And that was it, you know. But the thing about the book is how it's, and the whole event is just taking on a whole...
Mythics.
Yeah, well, right? It's taking on a whole, it's looked at in the lens, the politically correct lens of today, and that's what bothers me, and I'm sure that bothers Steve. The book, I mean, the book went its own course. I mean, I did a very deep anthropological dig on the book. I mean, I did a lot of research on the book. I was doing that book as my parents were sick. I'm looking at all these women coming off that boat.
Oh, wow, look at that. Is that the Spirit?
Yeah.
That's a nice view.
But I found a lot of people. I mean, you know, I found Lorelei, and I found Thad Bosley, who played for the Cubs and the White Sox, who actually did an R&B record. A lot of radio people, Gary Myers in it. I'm just going off the top of my head.
Sure.
There were probably 40 different interviews in that book. Ed Farmer, who has since passed away. Roger Bossard was great. He's the only guy that got mad talking about Disco Demolition. He, he's a groundskeeper at Sox. He's still there. And he goes, "How would you like it if somebody came into your house and turned everything upside down?" And old military guy. But it was, Dahl was great. Dahl never got on my mind. I wrote the book. It's by Steve Dahl and Dave Hoekstra, but I wrote the book, but he never interfered with anything. Never told me what to do. I think the only thing he didn't like Mike Veck. How can we forget about Mike Veck? I mean, so we got the whole Veck thing in there. But the only thing, I think maybe at the end, and Janet read the book, but I think maybe Dahl thought Joe Shanahan of Metro was a little too rough on him. Because Shanahan leaned into the whole thing that everybody talks about today, how it was a racist and homophobic event. And it's sad that it
I never even thought that. I never even realized it. Maybe I was too young to even realize what was going on.
People look at it that lens, and that's a big lightning rod for that whole incident now. And the Veck family, Bill Veck and Mike, his son, I'm going to see this weekend. That's the furthest thing. They were active in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
When they lived in Baltimore, Harry Belafonte and people like that would come to their house. Bill Veck stood in line for Martin Luther King's funeral with his wooden leg. Bill Veck was very progressive on the hiring of minorities when he owned the Cleveland Indians, now the Guardians. He brought Larry Doby as the first black to play in the American League. He was some of the first people to hire black people for the front office in Cleveland. So anybody who says the Vecks and the Whites would sign off on a racist and homophobic event, they don't know what they're talking about. And I'm tighter with the Vecks than I am with Dahl, but it just really upsets me that that people, you can see, I really get upset about it. And Dahl, there's all these documentaries coming out now. I wouldn't even participate in the last one Natkin has, but everybody talks about it, and the reason it's such a sexy thing now is because of the racist and homophobic event, because that's the world we're living in right now.
Wow.
So I feel sorry for all the people who are involved. I feel sorry maybe that I even got involved with the book. I mean, you go on Goodreads, or people downgrade the book because of that, and they haven't read the book. I mean, what we did in the book was I made the thread, and Steve was all good with this. I made the thread on the death of. I talked to Nile Rodgers, and the death of disco and how it helped create house music. And Frankie Knuckles, he was passed away by the time we were doing the book, but Frankie Knuckles kind of talks about how house music was the next thing. It was an inevitable next thing. Disco was always dying out. It was already dying out in '79 and '80. It was ready to move on to something else, But I didn't see it, but people told me about the Bee Gees documentary where they go on and say how Disco Demolition ruined their careers, And it's really unfortunate because it's a example of we're talking about on other subjects, how the world we're living in, people put people in pockets and make broad statements about stuff when they're not educated on them. You're getting good stuff here now. And unfortunately, anyway, I don't know if people can find the book. But, we're there. I was there. And Joe Shanahan will talk about how he grew up in Beverly. And we're there. Racist kids there. And we're there. Homophobe. Yeah. There was never like 70, 80,000 people. I was there. It was like they sold the place out. But the stuff you hear about the Dan Ryan being backed up with traffic. I don't remember any of that. It was a huge crowd. Anyway, were there racist people there? Yeah, probably there were.
Yeah.
You can't but was it a book burning? Did Steve Dahl call that event to people are calling it like a book burning now? It wasn't
be
that.
Racist people at the game tonight.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there will. I've sat. Yeah, you're exactly. I've sat in the bleachers and I've heard I've sat there. I was the other day. I was wearing a old Matusi baseball jersey I got for a Yankee game years ago. I've seen people yell racist things at Japanese play, but I mean, it was about. It was about defending rock and roll. You got to, the way I wrote the book. You got to understand Chicago. You got to understand North Side, South Side. I talk about the stockyards. You got to understand the North Side being more yuppified. Comiskey's always been a working class, rugged neighborhood. Always a rock and roll neighborhood. The Loop was a rock and roll station. It was a call to arms. I mean, like I just told you my story. I wasn't a Loop listener, but I didn't like what was going on with Rod Stewart. And the doll poked the bear a little bit. I mean, I didn't go to any of these things, but he had this thing called the Insane Coho Lips, and before Disco Demolition, they would do shows like in Northwest Indiana, and he would, I know he would dress up. It was very much of a style and class thing he was trying to lampoon. So he would dress up like, you got to remember. Saturday Night Fever was big then, so he was lampooning that. When the Bee Gees were talking about how Disco Demolition ruined their career, well, who made them dress up in outfits with their shirts undone to their navel and stuff? That wasn't Steve Dahl. Right. And so Dahl, I'm trying to look at all sides of the story. So did Dahl go to these little clubs in Northwest Indiana, dressed up like a guy from Faces? Faces is in my book. Jimmy Rittenberg, great friend of mine. We talk about the Faces there. It's really a great book in terms of research. And I'll loan you a copy if you can't find them. I got one copy. So did Dahl poke the bear a little bit? Yeah. I mean, I saw video. I mean, did he go to these clubs and look like he was a disco guy? Maybe. Did he talk in a lisp? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It was not a call to arms. It was not a book burning. I was there, and and Steve's not that type of guy.
Right.
He's a liberal. He's not that type of guy.
Right.
And it just really, really bothers me that whole event gets thrown on the bus like that, because not that I'm a defender of that event, but just showing me that the world we're living in. I'm working on a project now about the guy who designed the Playboy bunny. It's like and people go, "Oh, Hugh Hefner." I wrote for Playboy for years. I just did music reviews. Nat and took pictures for. Hugh Hefner, a lot of stuff came out of him when he died and stuff, but Playboy was a great voice for writers, for civil rights, great artist, Leroy Neiman. And so I think what pulls my trigger on the whole disco thing is just people are just so fragmented right now, and that's why I try to do these projects I do.
Well, you talk about Beck, and it's like he must have been. I didn't realize he was so connected with Belafonte and King, and he probably was his grandkid or son probably knows Tony Bennett. They're probably friends with Tony Bennett.
Yeah, too. They were all, the Beck family is very progressive, and their hearts are all in the right place. And when people just run that whole event down, it really, they don't know what they're talking about.
You've been to 50 straight opening days, right? And you've got the scorecards.
I got the scorecards to prove it.
Wow.
I should have brought them.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story.
50 straight, to be accurate, 50 straight home openers.
Right, home openers, right. That's what I should be clarified, right. So that's amazing. For the Cubs. And then I found something else that we have in common. You were friends with Yoichi
Sakaguchi, right?
Yoshi.
Yeah,
I wrote about
Yoshi.
him a lot. Yeah.
And so we know Chica and Tom and Reese and Kirk, and that is like, I just kept discovering all these connections with you, and I'm like, wow.
Boy, how did I think I did a story, back when I was at the Sun-Times, I would do stories that were really wacky, and we weren't supposed to do this. I did it a few times. If there were two left field, I would sell them to the reader. And I think I did a story, I didn't research any of this stuff, but I believe you could look it up. I did a story on Yoshi. Oh, I know, this ties in with the Cubs. So 2000, I went to the Cubs opener in Tokyo.
Oh my gosh.
And there I'd sold a condo, and I know I'd never make a lot of money, but I was living in a condo, so I had some little extra money for selling a condo. So I used that money to go to Tokyo.
Wow.
2000, Sammy,
Whoa.
Mike Piazza, Don Baylor was the manager, I remember that, for the Cubs. So I go to Tokyo, and I think by then, I don't know if I'd done the Yoshi story. I might have already done the Yoshi story for the reader. I did a story for Yoshi. Yoshi was a Japanese Hank Williams.
Yeah.
And he sang country music. He grew up in Japan singing country music. And he told me about this whole culture in Tokyo. He told me clubs to go to where it was hilarious. It was great. I mean, Japanese people singing. It was all old school country, the stuff I like. You know, it was Hank Williams, Patsy Cline. Oh, Yoshi was a huge Merle Haggard fan.
Oh,
and I loved Haggard. I interviewed Haggard a lot.
Whoa.
So Yoshi and I would talk about Haggard. I went and saw them when Yoshi lived up in the North Shore. He was an illustrator for Playboy. Mm-hmm. He worked with this Art Paul guy that I'm working with now. And so, yeah, that's how I got to know Yoshi. And I think, so I might have already done the story for the reader. So Yoshi set me up on places to go when I was in Tokyo. And he even hooked me up with a couple people who took me around.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah, so I wouldn't have known these places if it wasn't for Yoshi. So I went to one place, there used to be a place here in Chicago called, it's in our exhibit. See, everything circles.
Yes.
A place called the Double R. It was a Sundowners.
Sundowners,
yeah,
the band, right?
And, so they found a place for me in Tokyo that was just like their version of the Double R. And I went down there one night and listened to country music, like old school country.
Wow.
So Yoshi helped me with that, and we kept in touch over the years. Even when they moved to Pilsen, I would go.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, so you've been. Yeah. It's just amazing the history there. You know, he had two brothers that were
kamikazes, right? Yeah.
And my dad was on a destroyer, so it's just like so crazy that. And in his diary, he writes about the first kamikaze attacks. You know, and they didn't know what to call it, so they just called them suicide attacks. You know, and yeah, it's amazing the connections and all that stuff. And one last thing about Farm Aid. You have a book on Farm Aid, right? And I went to the first one in '86.
I'm looking
85.
at your helmet there. I bet you never got this much information from Ronnie Wickers. Look at that. Well,
who else do you see up there?
Well, maybe Ben House. You could get Did he give? He'd be close.
Yeah.
But Jerry, no.
Jerry,
I don't know.
probably know all
until I
those
talked
guys.
to you that Jerry had a publicist. I'm the guy who needs a publicist, not the bleacher preacher. The bleacher preacher really has a publicist?
Oh yes, he had a show. He just had a show.
In
in
was it
Uptown.
the gallery or
Yeah,
was it his own personal publicist?
It was his photographs.
Ben Hollis is the only one that I think give me a run for my money. Right? Anyway, this has been as fun for me as it is for you.
This is fun, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Farm Aid.
Farm Aid, yeah.
You know who's the germ of a lot of these ideas is really Paul Nacken. Paul Nacken is the guy who's got me involved in it. I think it was Paul's idea to do the disco demolition.
So you've known him for like
I've known
30,
Paul
40 years?
forever, but Paul's the guy he's the idea man. So it was Paul's idea to do the disco demolition.
To go to it?
Well, no, to do a book about it.
Oh, okay.
We were just talking about this. And I think Paul found the publisher, and they approached the publisher, and Paul approached Dahl, and they kind of brought me in to write the book.
Huh.
Even then, I was just like, I don't know. It was, just amazed, the whole disco thing. It's just amazing how many. There's 3 or 4 documentaries coming out that have to do with disco demolition.
Oh my gosh.
Great. But anyway, so the Farm Aid. Paul was I covered the first Farm Aid for the Sun-Times.
Did you? So you were there, right?
I was there.
It it was kind of drizzled a lot of the day.
Yeah, but God,
and
everybody
then it cleared
there.
up. It was
people,
incredible.
I didn't research any of this, but didn't the Highwaymen play there?
I have not.
People talk about life back then. Nobody cared about the highwayman.
I just remember Willie Nelson playing till like 2 a.m, and we're all like, Willie, you gotta stop! You're killing us here. And then they had this beautiful, amazing fireworks display afterwards.
But the highwayman was
I think they
Chris Christopherson.
Yes,
Nelson,
he was there. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Christopherson, Nelson, Cash, and Waylon. And I remember they played that. They might have played that, but I remember they played Joliet not long after. They couldn't sell tickets at Joliet. Now look at it. Those guys work together now. But anyway, Natkin was the farm aid photographer for years.
Huh.
And he was from day one. He was like their staff photographer. He shot all the concerts up until recently. And up until like 2 years ago. I think he was at almost every farm aid. I've probably been to about 10 of them, 12 of them.
Wow.
I went to them when we were doing the book. I've been to a lot, but went to one in Seattle. Went to one in New York. Anyway, but that was Natkin's idea.
Huh.
And we kind of did it in conjunction with Farm Aid. So there's policy statements in there and what they were about. I think Willie wrote an essay, but I went around and interviewed the 4 main characters back then. Neil, I'm a big Neil Young fan, but he was
amazing.
He was the worst to deal with. He put up a wall around us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we had to go through his wife. And, Willie was great. I went on Willie's bus through a cloud of smoke, but Willie. I've interviewed Willie maybe 2 or 3 times on that bus.
Gosh.
It's always been the same routine. He sits at his kitchen table and go through all the pot smoke. Mellencamp was great. I'm just giving you these little colors.
Sure.
So Nack and I drive down to Bloomington to Mellencamp's farm. At that time, he was married to that model
He's
wife.
Bloomington. Yeah.
And she had him on Good Behavior. Mellencamp can be. I love Mellencamp. I just saw him his last tour where he played the end of the tour in Milwaukee.
Oh.
And he can be very cantankerous, but he was on Good Behavior with us. He got us him and Natkin always had a thing going on. I think Natkin got on Mellencamp's nerves. They were always a little sparring and stuff. But we spent the whole day at his farm outside of Bloomington, but the nicest guy of all was Dave Matthews. Oh. We interviewed him in Seattle. He was just really, really sweet, just like a regular guy. We went to he had an apartment in Seattle or something, and went on the back porch. And his wife made us coffee, and we sat there. He was just really, really down to earth.
Wow.
So yeah, I did stuff like that. I did musicians again. John Prine, I think I interviewed him. Interviewed some farmers. So mine are like the stuff I did for the book. There's all kinds of stuff in that book. That book is still around. I do like oral histories of musicians and farmers. There's policy stuff. There's politicians in there. A lot of Natkin photos. Like I was saying with John Saul with the camper book. A lot of Paul's photos in the Farm Aid book. It's like a little coffee table book.
Oh wow. Huh. Well, I gotta sneak in a Sid Yiddish reference. He's up on
Sid
the
Yiddish, yes.
So he was at the first Farm Aid, and then also you have a mention of Jello Biafra in the camper book. That's like his hero.
Wow. I don't remember. Did I wrote about Jello Biafra?
Well,
in the camper book?
he donated some artwork to Shady Glen, I think it was. The Shady Glen campground, and you mentioned it in the book.
Shady Glen. Was that?
Is that right?
That Willie Smoke is getting to me. Shady Glen, was that the one in Bisbee, Arizona?
I think it was Arizona.
Yeah,
maybe.
Bisbee.
Yeah.
So that's where you, I cheated on that one, I think. I was probably, that may be the last Cubs, I don't know when it's during spring training. It's it's by Tucson. Anyway, that's where you go. I didn't bring my camper van on that. That's where you go and they have like old, people do this a lot now. That wasn't so much, since that book came out, camping became a thing. Mm-hmm. And it's more, I think that had a lot to do with the pandemic. But back then there were several places like this, and I think there's a lot more. But they have like vintage trailers and Airstreams.
Yeah, that's what I think it was.
And you rent them for a night.
Right.
And I think that set up there in Bisbee. Bisbee's kind of a hippie town, and I think people from LA might go there for weekends, musicians and stuff. So maybe that's how that came around. But I interrupted you.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
But you were going to say Sid Yiddish. And,
oh, no, I did. I got it out. It was Jello Biafra.
Okay.
And the other thing was, he's up on the helmet. And what was the other? There was another Sid Yiddish connection. Farm Aid. He was at first.
Farm Aid, yeah.
So, well, Dave, this was unbelievable.
How about that?
Thanks for meeting me.
You read my obituary. If I make it through Yacht Rock night.
Yeah, so now you got a Sox game to go to. This has been great, but thanks,
All right,
man.
thanks.
All right.